We have Zach Dykes on here, the Complete Athlete podcast, where we get you to your next level in your sport and in life. And today we're actually talking about multiple sports because Zach, as we have talked about in a previous podcast, he's a track coach, he's a wrestling coach, he trains our baseball players. He even dabbled in the football realm at one point in time. But athletic training is his memo. He's certified in so many different things. I can't even name that list. But super excited to have you on here today, Zach.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And we're going to kind of dive into more of like the training methodology and a bunch of other talking points that we had previously talked about, but really want to get into more deep into it. So I kind of wanted to ask you, from your standpoint as a sports trainer and sports specific trainer, what is your training methodology with athletes like playing one sport, specializing in one sport these days, and then obviously the caveat, which is not as typical, 2-sport and 3-sport athletes depending on the school that they're at. So
yeah, as far as that goes, I would say that I think most athletes, when they're younger, the more youthful you are, the more sports you should do. We talked about the sports gene a little bit where, athletes aren't necessarily getting better. We're getting better at identifying athletes based on their body types and their builds, and they grow into that, right? So, at a younger age, if you're taller, it's like, okay, you're probably going to be a better basketball player. If you're, chest and hips, same height ratio, you're probably going to be better at weightlifting, gymnastics, things like that. You can look at body types like Michael Phelps. Michael Phelps has the best body for a swimmer. His wingspan is huge. He's super tall.
I remember them talking about that while the Olympics was going on, like just how proportionate he was, like, or disproportionate for that matter, being able to reach to the wall quicker than his other counterparts and things like that.
Yeah, it's just having those athletes that are built for a certain sport and then getting them the proper training and introducing to them those things. So it's like, some athletes aren't built for the sport that they want to do, and then they have to work that much harder. If you're a 5'6" guy and you have a very bad vertical and you want to be a basketball player, it happens. There are people that are shorter that made it in the NBA, but the reason they made it is because they were the best, defensive player, or their dribbling was so much better, and it was just, sometimes, it's like the height ratio with a basketball player. It's like if you're playing and you're a foot above somebody, it's like harder to cover somebody that's a foot shorter than you. So there's that aspect too. So it's like, okay, did that help them out? Another interesting story in the wrestling realm of things is there's been multiple wrestlers that have been, blind, only had one leg. There was one guy that was like a quadruple amputee that was a state entrant in Georgia, made it to the state wrestling meet, against fully abled kids. Yeah. And it was just like, how do you wrestle somebody like that?
Because it's completely different than every single other opponent. So you have to I don't even know how you'd practice to prepare for that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just you don't know how to interact with those athletes. But, so first of all, finding the athlete that they're going to be successful with in that sport. And if that is your sport of choice, then specializing in that sport at a later date. Once you get older, the older you get, the more your body's kind of developed. And you're like, yep, this is the training I want to do. And then having training that correlates with that sport of choice. So when we think about baseball, right, it's completely different than other sports because you're trying to do, max velocity throwing, hitting, and then you sprint either to catch the ball or get on base, or, somebody's trying to tag you out. So you're doing very explosive stuff in a very short period of time. Yeah. It's different than football where it's like you're doing repetitive plays at, 5-6 second goes where it's just like you're up to bat or you're fielding and you're waiting for something to happen and you might need to sprint to get the ball, or you hit it in the park home run. That's the longest that you're going to have to run probably in baseball, and just you have to be fast enough to make that play. So you want to, train those things for your sport, but having other sports, other training that's going to help those things. For instance, if I'm, not a good example of this, I did cross country to get better for wrestling, but I was a sprinter in track. So those two things go opposite directions. So I wasn't the best at cross country, and it probably hurt my sprinting ability because I was doing more distance running. Right. So it's like whatever you focus in on, that's what your body's going to develop. So there is something to be said about doing different things.
Because you were training the slow twitch muscle fibers for cross country, and then you need the quick twitch for sprints.
Yeah. So then my body probably had more of the intermediate fibers, which is right in between the both of them. So it's quicker to fatigue, but still more explosive than the slow twitch, that sort of thing. So it helps with wrestling because you need everything. So wrestling was my main sport of focus. So cross country, you know, helps with wrestling. Sprinting helps with wrestling. You know, doing one more than the other, would it hurt me to do, you know, distance running during the track season? Maybe, you know.
Well, yeah. How does your body adapt to that if you're doing well? Because you can't do. Has there been anybody who does distance running and like sprints, or no?
Yes and no, but it's like if you're trying to be the best at one, you're gonna double down on it. Like Scott Christensen, the thing is, like, he's produced more state championship milers than anyone else in the country, I believe. So he's the Stillwater distance coach, and he still might be. I might be retired at this point, but he coached, you know, multiple state champion milers. And the thing that he always said about his athletes is like, well, what's the commonality among all of them? And he didn't. He's getting interviewed by Running World or something like that in the magazine.
Yeah.
And he's like, I can't think of anything. But I was at a conference where he's speaking, and he goes, I actually thought about it after the fact. And the thing that all these milers had in common was that as freshmen doing the 400, which is a quarter mile, they couldn't break a minute. So under a minute for a 400 is considered like a decent time. Like the fastest in the world now, which is like crazy how fast these guys are doing it, is like 44 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So like an 11-second 100 meter was a good fast time. You might go to the state track meet in Minnesota with that time.
Yeah.
There's guys that can do that 4 times in a row in college,
Mm-hmm.
or, you know, the Olympic level. So all these athletes that he had weren't fast in a quarter mile. So when they were seniors and when they won the state championship mile, all of them did 1 minute splits for a quarter mile. And then their last quarter mile, they did it in sub 54. So,
Wow.
So they ran faster. So these guys are running sub 4-minute miles in high school. And the way he trains them is he does fast twitch stuff, because you need that turnover. You need the endurance to support that. But when you're kicking it in that last lap, you want to switch over to some different fiber systems and different movements. So they kick it up just a little bit, and they have to train their body mechanics to go fast. So he does fly 30s, and he does that, you know, about 20% of the time with his training. The rest of it is, you know, pure distance. You're doing, you know, some quarter mile repeats, stuff like that. But then he does those fly 30s, 30-meter flies, full speed, full sprint, and then he's just training his athletes to get faster. And with those, it's very tedious with sprint training. A lot of people don't realize most of what I do at a track practice is stand around and watch kids. You know, that's because it's like they sprint, they rest, they sprint, they rest, and we want to do it as quickly as possible.
And to go off that point, you mentioned sprint rest and the rest component, which I think a lot of athletes and their parents may not understand is the most important, correct?
100%. And kind of coming back to like doing the multiple sport thing, right? So CrossFit's a great analogy for this. So the way they looked at CrossFit is like, let's say you have, you know, you do a swim, right? You do a bike ride, you do a weightlifting competition, you do, you know, a marathon, whatever. Bunch of different events, different fitness aspects, okay? So, and then you put a marathoner, you put a swimmer, you put a sprinter, you put a weightlifter, you put all these people in this category, right? So the weightlifter is obviously going to win the weightlifting. They're going to be the strongest. But then when it comes to like the swimming and sprinting, they're probably going to be weaker. The goal of CrossFit is to not be the best at anything. It's to be good or above average at everything. You're not focusing on one specific discipline. So that's why CrossFit is called what it is. It's CrossFit. You're trying to be fit for whatever life throws at you. You're not specializing at all. Whereas if you are trying to be the fastest kid or you're trying to be the best distance runner, you want that specialization, and you're going to sacrifice some other things. You're not going to probably squat 500 pounds if you're trying to do a 2-hour marathon.
Yeah.
It's just different body mechanics, different type. There are some freaks that can do it. Like I saw a guy, I think he's one of the only people that's done this. He did, in the same day, he did a 500-pound back squat, and he ran a sub 5-minute mile.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, but that's like he trained for that, and it's just genetic freak.
Yeah.
So, you know, you want these kids to focus in on what they're going to have their main sport be and have that specialization of training.
So how would that specialization be with baseball?
So with rest, it's like, you know, we talked about, well, how many attempts at bat are you going to get in a game? So it's like 7.
No,
8,
3 or 4.
3 or 4, right?
Yeah.
So, but then when you go to practice, it's like, well, if you have 60 attempts at the plate, well, are those all going to be explosive like they would be in a game? Probably not.
No.
So then you want to have that rest incorporated where it's like my track athletes, it's like when we do relay exchanges, you know, when I first started, we do a ton of them, you know, 4x1, 4x2, we do the exchanges. And then I was making the connection. It's just like, nope. Usually when we do them now, they get 3 at most. And usually the reason they get 3 is because they had a bad one, right? But the thing is, when we do those exchanges, they're at full speed. We're not going anything less. You're going 100%. We're training, we're adjusting. You want to go 100%, and then we rest. So with my sprinters, it's like you need to rest to be fully recovered, because if the rest period's shorter, you're just training different muscle fibers, and then you're training more the endurance. So you're able to do more reps at a slower pace rather than keep the intensity high, keep your speed high, and then once you start to see them decrease, then just wind it down. Wind the practice down. So the analogy I give during track season is, do you want workhorses or racehorses, right? And the way I could probably think about this as far as like a pitcher is, if you have a starter, opener, pitcher, right? They're going to be more of like that workhorse, have a variety of pitches. They can throw pretty consistently, and then they're not going to have that maximum speed, right? Whereas a closer, they might only be good for 20, 30 pitches, and they're good for as fast as they possibly can throw. And then all of a sudden, you're going to see this decrease in speed, and then they can't keep throwing that hard.
Yeah, and to bring that point, and we'll be interviewing another guy later, but one of our other teammates, kind of what happened when you really specialize is moving from a starter to a closer. That usually happens in college time frame. It could happen your senior year of high school, but basically when you start to specialize, you have to change the way, like I moved from a starter to a reliever / closer. So I didn't really necessarily like that, but I had to train my body a lot differently, be more explosive for a short period of time, only throwing 10 to 20 pitches in an outing, because you're only going in for an inning or two. When I was used to throwing 70 to 100 pitches in a game. So from a stamina standpoint, it was a lot different. Obviously, I was able to throw the ball about 5 to 7 miles an hour harder. So I don't think some of our kids are that, but some of our college guys may get to that point here shortly. How do you set up your training sessions with our guys, like with the rest and recovery component with it? What are you currently doing now? I know you're really focusing on conditioning and whatnot, and then we're going to be moving into more explosive stuff in the summer. But how do you kind of set it up for baseball players in specific?
So the first thing that I will say is that general fitness is always the focus with everybody that I train. And it's just being generally fit is the first baseline, because if you want people to be an athlete, then you have that specialization. But most people in the general population have a baseline fitness. Like everybody, regardless if you're a wrestler, baseball player, football player, you should be able to squat well. You should be able to do pull-ups. You should be able to do all this stuff. And then having baseline conditioning, like regardless of who you are, if like we needed to run a mile, you should be able to run a mile. You might not be the fastest, but you're able to do it. So you start with that baseline, and then you identify like weaknesses with that, and then make sure everyone's moving towards that direction. But then once you kind of have that specialization, where it's baseball is like you have long rests. So with the athletes, it's focusing on what we can get in an hour. So total body training, squatting, hinging, pulling, rowing, core training. And then we typically superset everything just because of a time efficiency. If we had more time and they were training like a professional athlete, we'd probably do more straight sets, more explosive plyometrics, where you have really long rest. Where it's them, we're focusing on the general fitness and then doing specific things for baseball during the conditioning. So shuffles, med ball throws, plyometrics, things like that, where we're doing very short, limited amounts of work, about 10 seconds, and then we're resting pretty much the rest of the minute, depending on what we are doing. Sprinting, like I told you before, there's job security in hiring a guy like me and teaching baseball players how to run, because none of them run as well as they could.
Well, form-wise, I've already heard some of those comments from parents. It's like, oh, I saw him out on the baseball field. He's running differently. Like, oh, yeah, we've been teaching on that.
Yeah, and that's where it's just like, hey, if we can just give that proper coaching, and then athletes can move in the right direction, you can drop times, they can be faster, they can be more efficient, and then training those fibers to respond. So doing the fast twitch stuff, sprints, we're doing short sprints, turn and go, simulating, stealing a base, those stances that correlate. As we're getting closer to the baseball season, it's more, plyometrics, longer rest, very fast twitch stuff, where we're doing, like I said, very short intervals, 10, 15 seconds worth of work and conditioning. Plyometrics, same thing, where we're doing super long rests between sets because we want maximum explosiveness. If, we go to the CrossFit style of things, we could just have athletes do wall balls, right? And then all of a sudden they go from that fast twitch, your creatine phosphate system, to the glycolytic, and then they go all the way to the aerobic system, which is more your distance training, if we have them go for a minute. But nothing in baseball, I haven't seen very many plays that are a minute long. So, but with that, you want that baseline of fitness where it's like, okay, if we had them do something like that, they shouldn't be struggling a lot. They should be an athlete first, and then they should be a specialized athlete or player after that.
100%.
So, and that's kind of, you turn over those muscle fibers where if you're a sprinter, and you've been sprinting all your life, most of your muscle fibers in your body are shifted towards the fast twitch.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a distance runner, over your lifetime, most of your fibers are going to be that slow twitch. And that's what you want the focus. Most people in society have slow twitch fibers because that's what most of our activity is. So sitting, walking around, everything like that. But there are some benefits to doing that. The way to think about, weight loss too is a big component of this, is that as your exercise intensity gets higher, you burn more carbohydrates. Yeah. When you're doing lower level stuff, you're burning more fat. So the thing that a lot of people don't know about me, and they're like, well, how much cardio do you do? I'm like, I don't do a lot. And it's like, well, they're like, what? And I'm like, I don't. And then they're like, well, why not? I'm like, well, I walked 20,000 steps training people yesterday.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, that's my cardio. No, that doesn't count. I'm like, walk 20,000 steps and tell me how.
The general fitness thing that I learned, even having a private coach over the last year or two, is 10,000 plus steps a day.
Yeah.
At least.
Yep. And that's about, 6 miles worth of walking. And some people, it's like, well, that's too much, or I'm too tired after that. I'm like, you have to build your body up.
Yeah.
And it's, like I've talked to you last time on the podcast, where it's like when I'm hunting, I'm walking sometimes 30, 40,000 steps in a day. I'm walking all day. My legs are tired. It's supporting my body weight the whole day. I'm burning fat. When I get back to the cabin, I'm ravenous for a meal. I'm not eating a lot.
Yeah.
So, and I'm burning fat when I'm doing that. So like, that's my cardio. And then the cardio that I do on my own is more of that high intensity stuff. Mm-hmm. And kind of with that general population, everyone wants a six pack. Everyone wants to look lean, athletic, and that's sprinting. Everybody that sprints, looks lean. They've got a big butt. They do, because it's like that's where all your power comes from. So then you can squat a lot, you can sprint fast, you have all that stuff, and you want to train that and maintain that. As you get older, a lot of people don't know that your strength does decrease. It's your ability to use that strength, your power. If you continue to use that power, then you're able to maintain your strength for longer periods of time. Grandma falls and breaks her hip falling down the stairs. She knows to grab the railing, but she just doesn't have the ability to. And if, as she got older, she would train more of that explosive stuff, it doesn't necessarily need to be weightlifting, plyometrics, but just something where it's training that power aspect, battle ropes, some med ball slams, stuff like that. And just having a little bit of that to maintain what strength you have is going to allow you to age more gracefully.
Well, to that point, we have viewers and listeners who some are trying to become an elite athlete. Mm-hmm. And then there's others that are more beginner, just learning about this. Like from an overall general health standpoint, we've talked about this before, like what does general weightlifting and conditioning do for the human body that helps you age well from that standpoint? Can you expound upon that?
Well, basically, it produces more testosterone. So when you're weightlifting, you produce more. So guys produce typically about 27 to 30 times more testosterone than women. The biggest fallacy that I see in society is that the marketing towards guys is different than girls as far as the weightlifting. Guys and girls should weightlift the same because their body types are pretty much the same. The only really big difference as far as lifting is women shouldn't be doing as much chest pressing, because they've got breasts, that's for childbearing, everything like that. So they don't have as much muscle mass there. Should they still do it? Yes. Are they going to be able to be as strong as a guy or place as much emphasis on that? No. So everybody should be doing the same things as far as movement. So squatting, hinging, core development, baseline fitness movements a couple of times a week. So doing 2 to 3 times a week, maintaining your muscle mass, making sure that that's good. And then it can be an endurance form. So if you are training weights, you can get your heart rate elevated in that zone, that 120 to 160. So that's kind of where that, carbohydrate and fat burning zone kind of meet. Yeah. So you're getting the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I've heard it's around like 1 130, 135 for like right above that.
Yeah, and
I don't know. It depends on the individual.
It varies. And then the other aspect is strength training helps your heart develop as well. So when you focus on the cardiovascular training, your heart has more viscosity. It can expand more. Whereas when you focus on the weightlifting, your heart gets stronger. It can contract more and more blood, if that makes sense. So if you focus on the cardio aspect, think about a balloon getting bigger, whereas, you know, you have a stronger muscle from the weightlifting aspect, so you can pump more. So you do get a cardiovascular benefit or heart rate benefit from doing weightlifting as well as cardiovascular activity. It's that same thing. Well, which one's more important? It's just depending on what your focus is on. So if you focus more on the weightlifting, your heart's going to get stronger. If you focus on your conditioning, it's going to get, be able to expand more. So whatever your focus of training is, that's what you're going to get a benefit. So you'll see your resting heart rate drop from that, but everybody should do it. It's not up for debate. It's a choice to do. And the thing about it is that whatever you put in, you get out. The problem with weightlifting that a lot of people have is there's no place to hide. It's, some people get to a point where they're like, they feel physically weak, or they go to a gym and they're embarrassed. It's a confidence thing where it's like, last week you lifted 10 pounds 10 times. Okay, this week we lifted 12 pounds 10 times, right? And you are improving. So the mental health thing, I think, is a bigger aspect of strength training, because I believe your mental toughness comes from that physical toughness. You need to develop that through training, and it's like there's no way to cheat it. You put the work in, whatever you put in is what you're going to get out of it. Yeah. And some people expect, they go to the gym, 3 or 4 times, or, you see these memes where it's just like, oh, I've been going to the gym for 6 weeks, haven't seen any results. This isn't for me. And it's like, okay.
Yeah, well, that's the January resolution, people.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's, you need to just emphasize that with weightlifting, exercise, and the general population, you're getting better every day. Your body is fighting a battle against time. Nobody gets out of life alive. But, like, your quality of life is something that you want to maintain. Something I ask all my clients is, and this is a thing that's harder to resonate with high school athletes, is when do you want to stop being able to do what you're currently able to? Like, if you're able to do this fast of a 40, you're able to back squat this much, you're able to run this fast of a mile, and, like, next year, let's say you were 5% weaker, right? Regardless of what you do, you're going to be 5% weaker. Well, like, you're not going to be okay with that. I'm not going to be okay with that. So you want to do what you can to maintain your body and move the right direction and age gracefully, if you will. Everyone's going to have battles that they, things that come up. You might get injured. You might slip and fall. You might have kids. That's a big thing. People, that have kids. I don't have kids myself, but that's one thing where I'm kind of like, it's a battle, because it's like, well, if you stop taking care of yourself because you need to take care of your kids, then if you get to a point where you're so ill that you can't take care of yourself, or you need to make time for an illness or a sickness, then who's to say that if you could have worked out one day a week just to maintain those gains that you had from training all those years, that would be better than just be like, I don't have time for this. I'm not going to make time for
health
this.
Health is wealth. We'll just put it at that.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't matter, whatever else is going on in your life, if your health is deteriorating over time, which our younger guys don't need to worry about that right now, but it's those daily habits that will kind of push you to maintain that health over time and become better. So I think that's a life lesson for every single listener listening. And what that kind of brings me to, what would, a younger athlete, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, that range, what do they need to be focusing on a daily basis? We talked about the weightlifting type stuff, but let's kind of dive deeper into the rest and recovery, because I know that's a big thing that you incorporate in your training sessions and talk to the boys about. But how would you approach daily habits of, like, I'll let you expound upon that.
There's a lot of things that I didn't think were as big of a thing that I needed to learn about or focus in on. One of the certifications I have is in RPR, which stands for Reflexive Performance Reset. Cal Dietz is the guy that teaches that certification. And the concept of that is it's based in, neurology, and basically your brain has these connections with your body, and you have certain firing patterns, right? Certain muscles that are supposed to fire in a certain way. So the whole premise of RPR is your body's only designed to do 2 things. We're designed to breathe, and we're designed to move, right? So if our breathing gets compromised, our body's going to find a way to breathe. if our movement gets compromised, we're going to find a way to move. Regardless if that's the proper way to move or not is up for debate. So breathing, I have that, I brought in one of my track athletes. He had an injury during football season, adductor issue, and then it's just something that was nagging on him, right? So, and, saw the trainer, saw some other people, did dry needling, went to physical therapy, which is another, whole other tangent we can talk about with that and how I feel about that. But I couldn't get
from my own personal experience as well.
Well, yes.
Yeah. We'll go into that later, but
couldn't get results. Like everything that he was doing, it was like it seemed like he would just sit in class and his leg would bother him, right? So I saw him after talking with the trainer and basically brought him in, did RPR resets, so neurological stimulation, and saw that he had some compensations or he was using muscles improperly, and then reset those muscles, and then no pain, right? So it got his firing pattern and was like identified these compensations about how he was telling his body to move. Mm-hmm. And then I realized with him, his breathing pattern was off. So he wasn't using his diaphragm to breathe.
Using his chest.
Yeah, he was using his chest. Chest was rising and falling. Wasn't recruiting the proper muscles from the diaphragm. And then everything expands outward from your breathing. So if your breathing is off, a lot of people are like, well, why does that matter? You breathe more than you do anything else during the entire day. You breathe 20,000 times a day, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on what you're doing, how your training is.
That's crazy.
So if your breathing pattern is off, right, you're not using the right muscles for it, then, you see things like sleep apnea is not a normal thing. Like sleep apnea is
even
more
though,
common. Everyone's like
normalized.
Yeah, but everyone goes and buys a mask, right? Yeah. But they don't work on the training. So if it's like you're training your breathing muscles to fire properly and doing breathing resets, and then like other things that I've seen is like the tape over the mouth, making sure you can nasal breathe, all these different
I have
things.
seen that. I've actually thought about just starting that here.
Yeah. It's one of those things where if it works and it looks crazy or it looks stupid, then why would we do it? And that's kind of, another tangent that I would want to get onto is like the Santa Claus debate. Okay.
Okay. So what are you going?
So just an F1. Just
you want to go into this now?
Yes. Okay. So basically, the way you think about Santa Claus, right? When you have kids, and I'm sorry to any parents if your kids are listening.
Goodness, okay? Zach, you're really doing this.
He's
to me,
doing this now.
So if your kid finds out about Santa Claus first, right? They're a jerk because they're going to ruin it for everybody else, right? But then if your kid's the last one to figure it out, then they're going to feel like they're an idiot and all the other kids are smarter than them, right? But that's the way it works with training methods, right? Because if I do something that's, crazy or out there, right, and I'm the first person to do it, everyone's going to be very hesitant, cautious about it, right? But if I'm the last person to do it, then I'm more stubborn about my training and everyone else is getting results with it, and then I was just the last one to accept that this is something that we should have been doing.
So where would you say the RPR, which you're talking about, and I know we've talked about it behind the scenes, but where would you say you're at on that curve with other trainers out there in the market?
I'd say I'm more towards being one of the first guys.
Yeah.
I don't ever want to be the first guy to try something.
Yeah, so that was Cal Dietz?
Yeah.
Yeah. And who is Cal Dietz, by the way?
Cal Dietz is the head strength coach at the U of M.
So he trains
everyone's strength and conditioning
at the University of Minnesota.
Yes.
Okay.
So he's in charge of all their programs. He's the head strength coach there. Triphasic training. He wrote that book. Really great book. A really great training. But it's a niche-y type of training. It looks like voodoo. I call it witchcraft, whatever. And it's just one of those things where it's just like the kids are like my biceps really sore, and then I hit this reset point and they're like I didn't know this hurt. This part of my body hurt, and I hit it. Hit the reset, and all of a sudden it's gone. And they're like, what? And it's just like it works, and there's no pain.
That's crazy.
And it's kind of voodoo witchcraft, and that's kind of the thing where it's just like if you can do something like that makes an athlete that much better, right, with one thing, then why wouldn't you be doing that with everybody? And it's having these conversations. It was I was probably 3 or 4 years ahead of where most people are now. A lot more.
How long have you been training in this?
I probably got my certification, I think, in 2017, 2018.
Wow.
So it's something I've been doing for a pretty significant portion of time, or have had it for a while. And it's something that's always in my back pocket. Like, I have to be comfortable enough with people to, do it. and it's something that if it provides results or if they're willing to buy in or try it, then they've gotten great results with it.
Yeah, I know you used it on some of our national team players,
Yep.
and they've been complaining about a certain injury for a certain amount of time, and they're like, "What the heck?"
Yep. Yeah, and that's
how do I feel this good?
Yeah, exactly.
And they sleep better, right?
Yep. And that's just the whole thing. Is it's just I would rather have my athletes be 100% healthy and 80% in shape rather than 80% healthy and then 100% in shape.
Yeah.
So sleep is a big thing. So RPR kind of works with that sleep. So some people that have done RPR, they sleep better, their breathing's better, so they can relax more. The biggest thing about society is that we're always in this fight or flight mode. Like if you are leaving the parking lot here and you turn the wrong way into oncoming traffic, you're going to die or get in a car accident.
Yeah.
So your body has that awareness of, hey, watching other cars, and it's stressed out, or it knows that there's a consequence to that. We don't have a lot of times now as human beings where we're just completely relaxed and just in our own little world where we can lower our heart rate. Everything is rest and digest, parasympathetics taking over, we're taking naps. Even when you're on your cell phone, there's stress that comes from that. You're getting the stimulus from that blue light, watching videos, whatever, fight or flight, and your body's focused on this. So then if somebody's talking to you, you're kind of a little bit more jumpy, if you're looking at your phone or you're distracted. So we get so invested into all these different things that our body's always in this stress state. And that's what RPR does, is it resets everything. So it puts you back in that parasympathetic, that rest digest calms the body down. So then when you go into that fight or flight next time, you're recruiting the proper muscles, proper channels, and using your muscles properly. So, and that's kind of the physical therapy side of things, is that, okay, well, we can do all the soft tissue work in the world. If there's no connection to that muscle that we want to utilize, then it's not gonna get the response. So, but if you reestablish that connection through that RPR connection, then okay, that muscle's active, we can utilize it, we can feel things where it's just, some athletes where it's like, I haven't had this connection or the sensation in this part of my body for a long time. And it's just that nerve ending's been overused, whatever, a compensation's developed, they're firing the improper muscles, and then all of a sudden we reset it, and then they can utilize that muscle again, and then they can get stronger. Like people at the U of M have done the same cardiovascular workouts 1 week to the next. So the first week they did them without RPR. The second week they did everything the same, and then they did an RPR reset.
Yeah, it's like a little experiment.
Yeah, same exact cardiovascular workout, and their heart rates were 15 beats lower. So when they had the right heart rate monitors on, so you don't need to work as hard, or your body is working more properly, then that's a better response.
Wow.
Yeah.
We hadn't even talked about that.
Yep.
That's pretty. That's a really good test to see exactly how your body responds to this.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
But with, that's one aspect. So, your breathing. So breathing properly, perfect posture. Most of these kids sit all day at school. I'm very perplexed when first day of track season, like I run my kids just through general stuff. And it's like stuff you wouldn't think of when you think of a track athlete, but balancing on one leg, holding your knee to your chest, single leg strength, stuff like this. Can you fit your fingers between your toes? That's a test, for ankle mobility, foot mobility, that not a lot of people think about. And all this basic stuff where it's just like, yeah, if you can't do this, this, and this, you're opening yourself up for injury. So I think a lot more athletes need to work on like their overall movement quality, moving well. I teach my track athletes how to walk. Like the first week, I'm like, you need to learn how to walk again. And it's just, they're like, what? I'm like, I'm walking my whole life. But I'm like, you're telling your body what to do, whether or not you're feeling and properly using all the right muscles to do that, then it's just like, okay, then they walk better. And you're like, well, why does that matter? I'm like, if my kids walk, 10,000 steps a day during school, and I see them during a track practice, and we get 3,000 to 4,000 steps in, between sprints or running, whatever, that's a whole track practice. That walking aspect, if I can teach them how to do that better, that's going to make sure that track practice is even better and they're more efficient. They're going to be walking more during the day than they are going to be sprinting, but we want it to be that much better when they come into the sport, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. It was a metaphor. I forget who the the coach for the UCLA Bruins a long time ago was. I'm forgetting it. John Wooden. He would tell his players when they come in, like,
The sock.
Oh, the sock thing. You know it. Yeah, the cotton swabs on the sock or the shoelaces, like how you're putting your shoes on is going to prepare you for what you're going to do afterwards. So with you, it's the walking. I mean, obviously, if you can't walk correctly and the right muscles aren't firing, how are you going to be able to run?
Yep.
Or jog and then run?
Yeah, his whole thing, I believe, was he taught his players how to put their shoes and socks on the first day of practice every season he coached. And the reason it was like, how many of you ever gotten a blister playing basketball?
Oh, all the
and
time.
And it's like, how can you, like, do you play better or worse with a blister? Play worse. It was like, well, why don't we do something to prevent that from ever happening?
Yep.
So every day is like that. Really a lot of respect for that guy, and like just setting expectations. Like I remember there was one story about his athlete that had like shoulder length hair back when, it was kind of, more of a hippie style, whatever.
Yeah.
And he went up to that player and he's like, yeah, like you need to get a haircut. We have a requirement on this team. And he's just like, well, coach, it's like, it's my hair. I'm going to do what I want to do. And he goes, I respect your commitment to your values, but you won't have a place on this team. That's what he told him. The next day, the guy got a haircut.
Boom.
It's just like,
yeah.
And that's the problem, I think, with the parent coach dynamic, because some parents have very low or no expectations for their kid at home. And then when they come into a sport, it's like a coach has expectations for all their players, and it's like, well, why are you coming down on my kid? It's just like, well, they weren't meeting the expectations like everybody else was. And it's not that, you're calling their kid out or their kid's bad. It's just, no, you need to set a precedent with everybody. And
that's how we mold young adults.
It's tough because we've had this conversation as uncoachable kids or unemployable adults. And you need to set expectations for kids, because then if there's expectations and then there's consequences, that sets them up for reality. I'm, being coaching in the school district and the way, things are going educationally, it's not the best for life. It's like so many of my kids on, at least this time of year, and track season, no different. Like they'll be late to track practice or wrestling practice because they had to remake a test. It's just completely get to redo it, so they're like, I need to be miss practice for an hour because I'm redoing this test. And I go, well, why didn't you study the first time? And it's just, I'm not trying to be mean, but it's just like if you didn't think you had a chance to redo it, would you have studied harder?
Yeah, it's just like what we were talking about with the preparing to play in game situations for baseball, 3 or 4 at bats a game. Some kids think that they have unlimited at bats.
Yeah.
And you don't.
Yeah.
You don't every single game. You only get maybe 2, 3, 4, depending on if you're in the full game or part of the game or whatnot. So I think that's how kids and young adults should prepare themselves, because that's what life's going to throw at them once they turn 18 to 22 years old, depending on if they're, in college or decide to go in the workplace right away.
Yeah. Well, it's like there's consequences for being late to work. It's just like if you're late to practice and we don't say anything about it, then as a coach, you probably don't care. Right. It's just, you're babysitting. And I think that's the problem, is that, some parents, I'm not saying a lot, but some parents look at athletics or these things they sign their kids up for as activities. And it's like, well, it is, but it's like you're working towards something. And if you're just investing your time in something, but you're not motivated towards a goal, then it's just like, what are you doing? You're just spinning your wheels, and it's just, you're killing time. And if your, focus is on something else, then do that. I'm not going to feel bad if there's a wrestler on the team and he wants to be, a hairstylist, whatever. And he wants to do it. I'm like, be the best hairstylist in the world, but don't invest your time in something that's not moving you forward. And I think a lot of parents, some of them live, vicariously through their kid because, they were, in this sport or whatever, and they just want them to do that, but they have to realize that their kid isn't them, and I'm not my athletes either. Yeah. And how it was for me, and it's sometimes that's that struggle of trying to resonate with athletes about how it was for you and how it is for them. It's different, and it's different times and generational and everything, but you need to have that connection. And I think that's why if you have a coach that has done the sport or been there, done that, you get a lot more out of it than somebody that hasn't. And they're preaching from a place of experience, and they want to have all my athletes, that's one thing I want all my athletes to have better experiences than I did, or be better or faster.
Or just have a positive influence on them too, from that standpoint, because we've gone through what they could go through here in the coming months, years, and trying to give them a path from that standpoint. I think that's what we are here as coaches and trainers in general, to give the kids a path or just lay it out for them, whichever path you want to go down. If it's just, trying to be a varsity athlete or just make that next team, or if you want to go elite level, I think that conversation on the front end with your child or your player, us coaches have that with them. And wherever they would like to go with it, we'll have our expectations based on that path, but we can kind of paint the picture for them.
Yeah, 100%. And that's kind of, what I tell all my athletes is like, I tell them all, I'm like, I love all you guys, but I'm always going to be honest with you. And I think as a parent, you have it's very tough to be honest with your kid. Sometimes it's being more mean. It seems like you're being mean as a parent because it's like you're their parent, and it's like you can't be your child's best friend. It can't be. You're their parent. You can't be their best friend. You could be their biggest cheerleader, but you're not trying to be their best friend. And as a coach, that's the same thing. I'm not trying to be your best friend. I'm trying to be your coach. And it's like that gray area between a parent and a friend, and then you're taking them on this journey to places that you're the only one that gets to take them there, right? You're in the dugout with all your players. It's not their parent. It's not their mom and dad sitting on the bench next to all of them, right? It's you. So if there's something special about that, and you're forging this connection and this relationship, that's a very special connection. But I think a lot of times, players aren't told what they need to do or take it, honestly. A lot of people give pushback to stuff they don't want to hear. I think part of what makes I frustrate a lot of people because it's like
you tell it the way it is.
Yeah, 100%.
People don't like that these days.
They don't.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is that I told my athletes this is that if I'm telling you something, and as far as like how you performed, right? I'm telling you this from a place of coaching and a technique, whatever. And if it was bad, and I tell you it was bad, and then you don't believe that yourself, you lie to yourself, right? You're like, no, the coach is wrong. I'm right. It's like, I'm right. It's an ego thing, right? And the greater the ego, the less the talent. And the thing is, with me, a lot of times I don't bring my ego into anything. And it's like I've met people that bring their ego into every single thing that they do.
Yeah.
And because of that, they're worse. And like the kids are worse.
Yeah.
It's their ego coaching them. It's not a place of technique or a place of growth. And we've talked about this a little bit, is there's ego-based coaches and athlete-based coaches.
Yeah.
And athlete-based coaches are always about developing their athletes. So you have to be honest with them. And your athletes need to want to get better. The thing that I had this conversation with my wrestlers this past week, and we figured something out, is the difference between the JV mentality and the varsity mentality. The varsity has been not doing as great this year, but the JV, the kids that are coming up through the program, are like, we're seeing increases, and like other coaches have complimented us on like watching our JV wrestlers, because it's like they're pretty dominant when like we're increasing linearly, moving in the right direction.
That's awesome.
But the varsity kids are kind of, it's hit and miss with a lot of them. They're kind of stagnant with some stuff. There are kids that are going the right direction towards the end of the season. But we made the connection that the JV kids are only concerned about improving. That's it. They don't care about their record. So the JV kids, like some of them have certain moves that they've taught other JV kids. It's not me teaching them. It's not another coach. It's this one JV kid knows how to do the specific move.
So basically your coach, like we talked about this, a meme, you're a coach, and your whole job as a coach, and maybe you weren't at the seminar that some of us other coaches were at, but your job as a coach is to basically get rid of your job by teaching your players how to coach each other. That's like the ultimate goal as a coach.
Yeah.
That's what a Detroit Tigers pitching coach talked to us at that clinic we went to a few weeks ago.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like you have this culture, right? So the thing that we talk to them about is that all these JV kids are just concerned about getting better. So they're teaching each other moves. They want to wrestle a tougher kid. Whereas the varsity kids, the expectation is for them to be dominant and win, right? And then they go out there with they're afraid to lose mentality.
Oh, yep.
So they have this
back to the mental.
Yes, they're afraid to lose. Where it's like, I don't care if you win or lose, but I want you to wrestle hard for the whole match. And, if you're going up against a kid that's better than you, like, make it competitive. Don't get blown out of the water. Don't make dumb decisions. And that's what we realize is that a lot of the varsity kids want to go out and just be dominant and win. And it's got to be more than just winning. If you're thinking about improving, then you're going to those wins are going to come, right?
Yeah.
So if you continue to develop and improve. So, and that's the other part about it, is that you want to have a culture amongst your team where people call each other out on I guess you could say they're not putting their best foot forward.
Yeah.
So
because
like,
they know that they can do better.
And it's just like if, they're making dumb decisions, dumb plays, whatever. And if everybody on the team was aware of those own choices that they're making or those bad decisions, and they're like, yeah, that was on me. Like that was a thing that, hearing some of the stuff that was talked about, like the Vikings this year, I really liked.
The post-game speeches by Kevin O'Connell that they were posting on Instagram, like everybody was like, even my wife was like, I like this. Yeah. This is good culture. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah.
Yep. And that's the thing, that you want to establish good culture, because the thing is, if you look at successful programs, they have a good culture. They have good expectations. And basically, if we're trying to get athletes to improve, I always say raise your standard, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So as far as, that could be whatever. It's like you can do this as a JV level athlete, and varsity athletes could do this. So it's like the way you think about yourself and the positive aspects of, hey, I'm improving. A lot of kids, they're like, I'm bad at this. And I'm like, no, don't think about it. You're bad at it. It's something that you can work on. It's an opportunity to get better. Don't just think about it as good or bad. And then it's just,
there's no just black and white.
Yeah. And having mentalities of like improving. And like, it was very interesting, like, kind of something with this is like in wrestling, like a lot of with that mentality of like raising the standard, a lot of coaches, like they coach from the aspect of what's your first move on your feet, like a takedown, right? What's your second move? What's your third move? And the way somebody phrased that recently to me, which completely flipped my head on, is like, you shouldn't talk to your kids about that. Because then if you talk to your kids, like, and I imagine this is the same thing as, in pitching, right? It's like your best pitch, your second best pitch, your third pitch, right? Because then you're making a choice in the mat or throwing, right? And each time your confidence level goes down.
For each pitch?
Yes. Because because this is my best one, and then you're choosing to do the second one. So you're not as good at that, but then you're choosing to do something you're less confident in. Yeah. And the same thing with wrestling is that, okay, well, if you can't get your first move, it's not there, it's not a setup, it's not ideal, and your second move's there, you're going to feel less confident with that, as opposed to just raising the standard and being like, I'm good at all of these, right? And then you just have the opportunity to do them, right? Where it's like, hey, if you're throwing against somebody, they can't hit a changeup, right? And your changeup might not be that great, but that that's something that you can utilize, and that's against them.
Yeah, we tell our players, at least I've told this to a few pitchers, like, and what I had a coach tell me a long time ago is like fall ball or something is a time for you to work on the pitches you're not good at. So if it's a 3-2 count and you have a third or fourth pitch that you aren't confident in throwing, you're throwing that pitch. Yeah. Because otherwise you're never going to gain confidence in it. Yeah. You're just throwing your number 1 and number 2 pitch. You're basically, like in basketball, you're telegraphing the pass to somebody. Same thing with pitching. You're telegraphing what pitch you're going to throw because those are the only 2 pitches you're confident in. Yeah. So over time, you have to develop that. Same thing with a hitter. If a hitter can't hit an outside pitch, okay, well, I want to be looking for that outside pitch because that's what I want to become more confident in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's raising that standard, and that's, like I shared you that David Goggins thing where it's like you want to swim the biggest way, and I was reading this in this new certification I'm doing on working on more agility training, kind of more baseball, football style stuff, is you want to identify your biggest weakness in your game, and that's what you want to focus a lot of your efforts, not all of your efforts, but you look at the biggest thing that you need to improve on, and that's where we're having those conversations where athletes don't want to be honest with themselves.
Yeah, they want to work on the things they're good at, and not the things that they're uncomfortable.
Yes, exactly. Doing. And that's kind of the same thing with like the weightlifting component. Like everybody that's in high school wants to compare themselves to people in Hollywood, people at the gym. They want to compare themselves
TikTok influencers, Instagram 100%. Influencers.
And it's like, no, you shouldn't do that. If you want to be a professional baseball player, look at a professional baseball player and what are they doing? How are they training? It's completely different than a bodybuilder. If you want to be good at weightlifting and you want to be a bodybuilder, be a bodybuilder. Like me, that's the thing is that, I'm training for multiple different possibilities. I'm focusing on my muscle mass right now, doing a 4-day-a-week power building program, which is a combination of powerlifting and bodybuilding. So heavy weights a couple times a week. Body's getting a really good response with that. and then doing the wrestling conditioning, weightlifting, that sort of thing for them, and hopping in on those workouts every once in a while. But it's not like I'm focused on being a sprinter like I was in high school. I'm not focusing on being a wrestler like I was in high school.
Yep.
I'm not focusing in on marathon training. I'm doing more of that, what weightlifting style I want to do for me. And a lot of kids see these guys with, super big arms, 6-pack abs, all this stuff. And it's like, well, if you have all that stuff, there's no guarantee that you're going to be a successful athlete, right?
Yeah.
But if you focus in on the athletic side and you see those metrics improve and you do stuff with training, and you might develop bigger arms or a 6-pack through that training, that's a byproduct of the training.
Yeah.
It's not, sprinters have 6-packs.
It's not for the ego.
Yeah. Sprinters have 6-packs because their arm segments and their leg segments are moving across their body. So you do opposite arm, opposite leg as you drive.
Yep.
So your core has to stabilize while you're sprinting. So if you have a strong core, then you can control more force through your arms, through your legs. So just through sprinting, you should get your core stronger, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Well, I've always noticed my core physique change when I'm playing more basketball.
Yeah.
Because that was, what I used to do in high school. I was basketball, baseball, soccer earlier in high school. But that was the type of cardio, running. And every time I do that, my core's, getting better physique from that standpoint.
Yep, and that's the thing, is that like development is a product of the training. You're not focusing on the aesthetics.
Yeah.
And that's a big difference, is
The looks. I mean, everybody, like our youth guys, I know they like or our high school guys, they like the aesthetic of, all the social media stuff and whatnot, which is cool. It's good to showcase things, but that's not what it's all about. It's what's going on in the background.
My strength and conditioning a professor in college, he said, if anybody tells you the first reason they're not working out isn't to look good naked, they're lying to you. Which I was like, okay, that's fair. Everyone wants to look good, but like if you're performing, right, and you're an athlete, that stuff's going to come with that, right?
Yep.
So your
It's a
body's
byproduct.
Yeah, your body's going to develop as a product of that, and that's where you want to do the stuff that you don't want to do. That's going to help improve the biggest gains. Everyone wants to do the very specific stuff, but that's the problem. Like we were talking about general strength training, a lot of the athletes that they've developed their athleticism and their baseline athletics or strength training isn't where it needs to be, and if they just do that, like their skill level goes this much higher.
Absolutely.
So.
And that's kind of to my next point. So you're speaking in a workshop here in the next 4 weeks, right?
Yep. So we're doing a workshop on Sunday, kind of
Peak performance workshop.
Yep. So talking about, off-season training, nutrition, RPR, a bunch of different things, kind of just about ways you can emphasize on developing,
Yeah. And kind of having a plan going forward, what you should be doing in season, off season, you name it. But super excited to have you on there. I know you're going to bring a ton of value with what you're going to be talking about, and we're going to have a good amount of kids there. So make sure to sign up. We'll have a form here once we send this out. Sign up, confirm your spot, double confirm your spot. Looking forward to hearing Zach talking more about it then. But thanks for coming on, Zach.
Yep. Thanks for having me. Have a good one.